Hello and welcome to Skyline. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Dhruti Yatri, and tonight we are looking at 8 stories from across the globe that may appear completely different on surface. But when you put them together, they reveal something much bigger. So tonight we are not just going to read the headlines, we are going to connect the dots. Because behind every missile, every military arrangement, every oil shipment, and every fighter jet, there is another story. Story about power, story about money, security, and changing balance of the world. And for Indians living in the US, the Gulf, Europe, or India itself, these developments are not happening in some distant geopolitical universe. They can affect fuel prices, currency value, remittances, jobs, shipping, investment, and even the strategic relationship between India and the world's superpower. So, let's begin with the place that sits at the center of the entire economic chain. That's right, we are talking about the Strait of Hormuz here. Now, when you hear the word Strait of Hormuz, you may think that this is just another geographical name on the map, right? But look what passes through the narrow stretch of water, and suddenly the whole picture changes. Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important energy choke points on the planet Earth. A huge share of the world's crude oil and liquefied natural gas moves through this corridor only. So when military tension rises here, the consequences, it does not stay inside the Gulf. They travel. They travel through oil market. They travel through shipping insurance. They travel through the factories. They travel through the airline ticket. In fact, they travel through the supermarket prices and eventually they reach your bank account. Ladies and gentlemen, the latest escalation involving the US, Israel, and Iran has pushed the entire Strait of Hormuz into the center of a major global economic crisis. And according to the fresh matter, naval blockades and retaliatory strikes on commercial shippings have disrupted traffic in the southern lane of Strait. While the oil prices have repeatedly moved above the $90 and $100 range. And this is where the geopolitical story becomes an economic story. Because oil is not just fuel for your car. Oil is transportation. Oil is manufacturing. Oil is aviation. Oil is logistics. Oil is agriculture. So when the crude becomes more expensive, almost every part of the global economy, it starts feeling the pressure. In the meantime, for the United States, higher oil prices can mean higher petrol and diesel costs. They can push transportation much higher. Airlines could face higher fuel bills, businesses could face higher logistics expenses, and consumers eventually feel the impact through prices. Well, for India, there is another vulnerability. India imports roughly about 85% of its crude oil requirement, and this is according to the fresh material. So, if oil prices remain elevated, then India's import bill, it rises. And when India's import bill rises, pressure can build on the current account and the currency as well. And that brings us to the Indian rupee, by the way. For Indians in the US, a weaker rupee can look very attractive at first. If you send dollars home, you may receive more rupees for those dollars. And that means that an Indian in the US who was already planning to send money to India may suddenly find the exchange rate more favorable to them. But here's the catch. A weaker rupee is not automatically a good news. Why? Because the same energy shock that improves the conversion value of your dollar, it can also increase India's imported inflation. Fuel becomes more expensive, transportation becomes more expensive, production becomes more expensive, and eventually the cost of goods and services, it can rise. So you may receive more rupees when you convert your dollar, but those rupees may not buy as much as you expected. And yes, then there is the American side of the whole equation. Higher energy prices can make inflation harder to control in the US. Well, that can complicate the Federal Reserve's plan for interest cut rates. Well, if inflation stays stubbornly high, then rates may remain elevated for longer. And that has another, domino effect here. Higher treasury yield can keep mortgage rate high. High mortgage rate can weaken the housing market, and higher corporate borrowing cost can make companies more cautious about hiring and expansion. And yes, that can eventually affect the tech sector as well. So think about the chain here. A missile strike in West Asia Then an oil shipment is disrupted, oil prices rise, inflation rise, interest rate expectation change. Corporate borrowing becomes more expensive, companies become cautious, and suddenly a geopolitical conflict, and that too thousands of kilometers away, it is part of an economic conversation for a tech worker in America. Well, that is the real power of Strait of Hormuz. It is a narrow stretch on the map, but its economic impact, that is a lot. And yes, while investors are watching oil prices and currencies, there is another group caught much closer to the physical damage. Thousands of Indian seafarers. Well, the Strait of Hormuz is shaking the global market from a distance. But for thousands of Indian workers who are trapped on the ships inside the Gulf, this crisis is not a market chart. It's a real life story. Now let's move from the market to the people who actually are stuck into the crisis. According to reports, ladies and gentlemen, up to 20,000 commercial seafarers, well, many of them are Indian Filipino crew members. They remain stranded aboard nearly 2,000 commercial tankers and cargo vessels that is caught inside the Gulf corridor. Can you think what that really matters? These are not military personnel, they are civilian workers. People who boarded ships to do a job, people who expected to sail through an established international shipping route, people who expected to reach the next port, well, complete their contracts and eventually return home. But now, a narrow waterway has become one of the world's most dangerous maritime zones ever. Missile strikes, drone attack, sea mines, commercial vessels under a lot of threat, and shipping routes disrupted. Well, for the crew member trapped inside these vessels, there is no easy way to simply walk away from the crisis. They are on the ships, they are surrounded by geopolitical confrontations, and their family back home here in India, well, they are just watching the news, just wondering when they will come home. According to resources, the Indian Navy has deployed frontline warships into the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman under the Operation Urja Suraksha, with the destroyers and frigates conducting escort mission for Indian flagged oil tankers and LPG carriers. This is a major development because India's energy security and the safety of Indian citizens are now connected to the same maritime corridor. But yes, there's a difficult complication. Not every single ship carrying Indian workers is an Indian flagged vessel. Some ocean ships carrying Indian seafarers, they remain stuck at anchor near the UAE, Qatar and Oman. So even if naval escorts are available for certain vessels here, thousands of workers can still remain exposed to the delays. And yes, those delays have financial costs too. Contracts can be extended. Well, wages can become uncertain. Families can face the financial stress. But for the people who work at the sea, time is money. A delayed tanker, it is not simply an inconvenience for them. It can affect the workers' next contract. It can affect their family's finances. It can affect their entire chain of employment. But the seafarers, they are only one part of the story. According to reports, more than 8.5 million Indians live across the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. That is a huge Indian population living in region that is directly exposed to this instability, by the way. You name it. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, Kuwait, Riyadh, every city, every country in the Gulf. These are not just names on the map, by the way. These are cities where Indian professionals work in tech, construction, healthcare, finance, aviation, logistics, and even energy. And the Gulf is also really important for India's remittance economy. According to resources, the GCC region accounts for more than half of India's annual remittance inflow. So if the regional economy slows down, then Indian households can feel the consequences. Infrastructure projects can be delayed, companies can freeze the hiring, supply chains can become more expensive. Food and fuel prices could rise, and families dependent on Gulf salaries, they can suddenly find themselves dealing with the uncertainty. And this is why the Gulf crisis is not only about missiles and naval ships. It is also about jobs. It's about remittances. And for wealthy NRIs, the whole crisis is changing another thing, where they want to keep their money. Well, some are looking at the US dollar asset, some are looking at the Indian gift city structures. Others are considering domestic real estate as a hedge. But the most important message is simple. If you are living in a region that is exposed to geopolitical instability, don't think only about your salary. Think about your liquidity. Think about your insurance. Think about your evacuation coverage. Think about where your emergency money is held. And think about whether your family knows what to do if flights, ports, or border it suddenly becomes difficult to access. Because when geopolitics turns into security crisis, preparation suddenly becomes much more valuable than prediction. But you know why is the Strait of Hormuz still closed? And what exactly does Iran want before it considers reopening as one of the world's most important energy routes? Now we come to perhaps the biggest question in this entire crisis. What would it take to reopen the Strait of Hormuz? Ladies and gentlemen, according to fresh reports, Iran is rejecting any immediate reopening of the whole waterway and has placed sweeping demands on the table. And you know, these demands, they are not really small. Tehran is reportedly seeking the withdrawal of the US forces. It wants sanction relief. It wants frozen assets released, and it is reportedly seeking compensation of as much as $300 billion. Well, there are also demands involving restrictions on the US and Israeli vessels. Now stop for a second here and think about the scale of this. Strait of Hormuz is not an ordinary shipping lane. It is one of the arteries of the global energy market. So when Iran says that the waterway will remain closed until its demands are met, the message is not only being sent to Washington. It is being sent to global markets. It is being sent to oil traders. It is being sent to the shipping companies as well. It is being sent to Gulf government, and it is being sent to every single country that depends on energy flowing through this particular corridor. Well, the situation becomes even more complicated. You know why? Because Tehran has rejected claims that formal negotiations with Washington it is underway. So there is a diplomatic contradiction. The world wants negotiation, the market wants stability, shipping companies want safe passage. But Iran is signaling that it is not ready to simply reopen the route without major concessions here. And yes, that creates a very difficult calculation for Mr. Trump. If Washington accepts major concession, it could face criticism at home and among the allies. If Washington refuses, the crisis can continue. If the Strait of Hormuz remains restricted for a prolonged period, energy prices could remain elevated, and if energy prices stay high, economic consequences can spread far beyond West Asia. And this is where geopolitics that becomes a game of chess. Iran has geography. The US has military power and economic leverage. Gulf states have energy resources. Europe has a lot of energy requirement. Asia depends heavily on imported oil, and countries like India have to balance energy security with their broader diplomatic relationship. So, you know, every player has something to lose here. And that is why the Strait of Hormuz is becoming more than a military flashpoint. It is becoming a bargaining chip. The bigger question is whether this pressure can force negotiations or whether it creates an even more dangerous cycle of escalation. Because if shipping remains disrupted, the economic pain grows. If the economic pain grows, then political pressure grows. And if political pressure grows, then governments may take even more aggressive position. And that is how regional conflict can become global economic crisis. And yes, while Iran is demanding concessions from Washington, another major development is taking place elsewhere, and that too in West Asia. Three regional powers are moving closer together. We are talking about Saudi Arabia, we are talking about Turkey, and we are talking about Pakistan. Iran is using control over a critical waterway as leverage. And now, three other regional players are building a security partnership of their own. Let's call it a Muslim NATO. A new security arrangement has emerged in West Asia, and it could change the region's strategic calculation, by the way. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan, all three nations have signed the Makkah Joint Defense Agreement, creating a mutual defense framework under which an armed attack against one of any of three, it would be treated as an attack against all of them. You know, that is a powerful message, because look at these three countries that are involved. Saudi Arabia is a global energy power, one of the most influential states in the Gulf. Turkey is a NATO member with a major military and defense industrial base. Well, Pakistan, let's just call it a nuclear armed terrorist state. But put those three words together and you have a very different kind of regional partnership. Well, the agreement is described as defensive in nature though, but the timing is what makes it more important. The Red Sea is unstable. Houthi attacks have threatened commercial ships. The Strait of Hormuz is under pressure, and Gulf states are increasingly asking themselves a very difficult question. Can we depend entirely on outside powers for our own security? Well, here the answer, it appears to be changing. Saudi Arabia has spent years diversifying its international relationship under Vision 2030. Turkey has built a powerful defense technology industry, particularly in drones and naval systems. Pakistan, well, that's the only country that brings a lot of demands. So, each country, it brings a different aspect. Saudi Arabia brings financial strength and geography. Turkey brings defense technology. Pakistan brings threats. Together, they can create a regional security architecture that is less dependent on any external power here. And this is where the agreement becomes important for millions of Indians working in the Gulf. Because Gulf security is not just about governments, it is about jobs. Saudi Arabia's massive development projects that requires engineers, construction workers, healthcare professionals, and tech specialists. The UAE's economy depends heavily on international business. While Qatar is a major energy hub, Kuwait and Oman are deeply connected to regional logistics. So, if a new defense structure, it can reduce the threat to shipping and infrastructure, well, that can have economic consequences. Shipping costs could stabilize, investors' confidence could improve. Well, infrastructure projects could continue and regional employment could become more predictable. But yes, there is another side here. A new military bloc, it can also change the strategic balance. How will Iran respond? How will the US respond? What will Israel make of it? How will NATO view Turkey's role here, and what happens if the Red Sea crisis continues? Ladies and gentlemen, these are the questions that will unfold over time. For now, one thing is clear. The West Asia, it is not simply waiting for major powers to decide its security force. Regional powers are increasingly trying to shape that future themselves. And yes, while this new alliance is taking shape around Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan, Iran is also changing who it sits at the center of its security decision making. As regional states build new security partnerships, Tehran is strengthening its own security establishment by bringing a veteran military figure back into one of the country's top posts. We are talking about Mohsen Rezai here. Well, now let's turn back to Iran, because one appointment can sometimes tell you much more about country's priorities than 100 speeches. Iran has appointed Mohsen Rezai, a veteran commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as the new secretary of the Supreme National Security Council. And you know what? The timing is significant. Iran is facing heightened tension with the US. The Strait of Hormuz is at the center of the confrontation, and the region is already dealing with multiple security threats. The question is, why bring such a figure with such deep military experience back into the top security role now? Well, the answer may lie in the message Tehran wants to send. Well, Rezai is not a newcomer to Iran's military and political system. He has decades of experience within the country's security establishment. He has been involved in military planning, strategic affairs, and national decision-making as well. So his return places somebody with extensive hard security experience at the heart of Tehran's national security structure here. And you know what? That really matters. Why? Because the current crisis, it is not simply diplomatic. It is military. It is economic, it is maritime, and it is regional as well. The Supreme National Security Council, it sits at the intersection of all those issues. It deals with questions that can involve national defense, foreign policy, and strategic negotiations as well. So, think about that. When a veteran IRGC commander he moves into this position, analysts will naturally ask that, is Iran preparing for a tougher phase of confrontation, or is Iran simply bringing in somebody with the experience needed to negotiate from a position of strength? Well, it could be either, and perhaps that is precisely the point here. In geopolitics, appointments are often signals. They don't need to be announced. They are preparing for a major confrontation. Sometimes you simply change who is sitting at the table. Well, precise appointment, therefore, it matters far beyond Iran's border. It will be watched in Washington. It will be watched in Riyadh. It will be watched in Ankara. It will be watched in Jerusalem. And it will certainly be watched by countries whose ships and citizens are moving through the Gulf. And yes, while West Asia is watching missiles, ships, and security appointment, something very different happened in the United States. Well, a few aircraft crossed into restricted airspace near Donald Trump's New Jersey property. And suddenly, F-16s, they were in the sky. The West Asian crisis is raising a lot of questions about national security at the global level now. And in America, a national security concern that suddenly became visible over the skies of New Jersey. Now, let's move from Tehran to New Jersey. Mr. Trump, he was spending the weekend at his golf club, and then the alerts went off. According to NORAD, multiple general aviation aircraft violated temporary flight restrictions around the area. At least 3 civilian aircraft triggered the alert. Well, 2 were intercepted by F-16 fighter jets though. The aircraft, they were safely escorted away from the restricted airspace. And yes, the third aircraft, it also triggered an alarm as Trump was preparing to leave, briefly delaying his departure. In fact, a dramatic video captured one of those interceptions, showing an F-16 moving in close to what appeared to be a small aircraft near Jefferson Township. Now, obviously, this is very different from the geopolitical confrontation in the Gulf, but it do highlights another reality of modern security. When a protected person is inside a temporary restricted zone, even a civilian aircraft can trigger a military response. And that is why the presence of an F-16, it could look very dramatic on camera, even when the actual incident it ends safely. The aircraft is not necessarily being treated as an enemy though. It is being intercepted. The objective is to identify it, communicate with the pilot and move the aircraft out of the restricted area. And that distinction, it matters because airspace restrictions around high-profile political figures are not symbolic. They are security measures, and once an aircraft enters a restricted zone, military aircrafts can be deployed to enforce those restrictions. Well, for ordinary pilots, the lesson is simple. Know the airspace restrictions before you fly. Temporary flight restrictions can be issued for political events, presidential moment, and maybe other sensitive situations as well. And accidentally crossing one, it can lead to an extremely serious encounter. And for the viewers here, it is another reminder of what national security looks like in real time. You may see a small civilian aircraft maybe, but the military has to answer a different question. Who is flying it? Why are they there? And who poses a threat here? Well, that uncertainty is exactly why fighter jets can be scrambled. And yes, while America is protecting restricted area around the president, another US-linked geopolitical dispute is unfolding thousands of kilometers away in Greenland. And this time the issue, it is not an aircraft. Well, it is what lies beneath the ground. Yes, we are talking about oil. From fighter jets protecting restricted skies in New Jersey, we move to a completely different strategic battle. The fight over resources and influence in Greenland. While Greenland has issued a strong warning to a Trump-linked oil company after drilling equipments were brought ashore without the required approval. The company, Greenland Energy, says that Jameson's land region, it could contain a lot of crude reserve, potentially worth up to $1 trillion. But the Greenland authorities say that necessary permits are still pending. And this is where the whole conflict begins, because Greenland is not simply an empty Arctic territory that is just waiting for somebody to arrive and start the drilling. It is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. So any major resource development project, it immediately raises question about sovereignty, environmental regulations, and political authority. And now add Mr. Trump's long-standing strategic interest in Greenland. Ladies and gentlemen, the Arctic has become increasingly important for global security. It is important for shipping route. It is important for military positioning. It is important for minerals, and potentially it is important for energy as well. And here, Mr. Trump has also described Greenland as strategically important to his proposed Golden Dome missile defense system. So, when an oil company linked to that broader political environment arises with drilling equipment, well, Greenland's authorities, they are naturally paying a close attention here. The dispute, therefore, has several layers here. There is the question of permit. There is a question of who controls natural resources. There is a question of environmental impact. And then there is a much bigger geopolitical question. Who gets to shape the future of the Arctic? For decades, the Arctic was treated as one of the world's most remote regions, and that is now changing. Well, climate shifts are opening new possibilities for navigation. Countries are competing over minerals. Russia's major Arctic presence. The US sees the region as strategically important. Canada has major Arctic interest. Denmark has sovereignty responsibility through Greenland. And China has also been watching the region closely. So, the Greenland's oil dispute, it is not just a local regulatory disagreement. It sits inside a big contest over the future of the Arctic. And yes, if the resource estimates are even close to the claims being made here, the economic stakes, they are a lot. But yes, there is an important lesson here, ladies and gentlemen. Having resources does not automatically mean that somebody else gets to exploit them. There are permits, there are laws, there are local authorities, there are environmental rules, and there is sovereignty as well. So, Greenland's warning, it could become an important test of how resource competition unfolds in the Arctic. And finally, tonight, we return to India because while America and its allies, they are navigating new strategic realities, India is making a decision of its own. While Russia offered one of the most advanced fighter jets, we are talking about Su-57 here, and India said no. And that no may tells us something much more about India's future than the fighter jet itself. Well, the Arctic is becoming a new strategic battleground over resources and power. Well, our final story brings the same question of strategic independence back to India and its defense choices. For decades, Russia has been one of India's most important defense partners. Indian military platforms have relied heavily on Russian origin technology. Well, the relationship, it has survived major geopolitical changes. The Cold War ended. The global order changed. India built stronger partnership with the United States and Europe. And yet, the defense ties with Moscow, that continued. So when Russia offered India its fifth generation Su-57E stealth fighter, many expected New Delhi to take the proposal very seriously. And it did. But according to the sources, India has now signaled that it will not acquire the new Sukhoi stealth variant. And that decision, it is significant because Russia's offer was not simply about buying the aircraft. Moscow reportedly offered an initial batch of about 36 to 40 aircraft, technology transfer and local manufacturing at Hindustan Aeronautics Limited Nasik facility. There was even discussion of assistance for India's indigenous fighter program. On paper, it may sound extremely attractive, but why would India turn it down? Here the answer, it comes down to one word: supply chain. Russia is under heavy wartime sanctions. Well-advanced aerospace system requires sophisticated microelectronics, maybe other components too. Now sanctions can make those components harder to source maybe, and if you are buying a fighter aircraft that is supposed to remain operational for decades, you are not just buying the aircraft. Well, you're buying the entire supply chain here. You're buying spare parts. In fact, you're buying the upgrades, you're buying the maintenance, you're buying the software, and you're buying the future tech. And if the supply chain becomes vulnerable, the risk, it does not disappear when the aircraft is delivered. It can become a long-term military problem for you. Well, India has already experienced delays involving spare parts for some existing Russian origin platform. So New Delhi appears to be looking at a bigger picture here, ladies and gentlemen. New Delhi is playing smart. Do we want to become more dependent on system whose supply chain, it could be affected by sanctions here? Well, or do we invest more heavily in building our own? And that brings us to the Atmanirbhar Bharat. India is increasingly trying to build sovereign defense capabilities here. Instead of simply importing the next generation fighters, the focus is shifting towards upgrading the existing. Su-30 MKI fleet with Indian system and escalating the indigenous AMCA, Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft Program. And that is a very different strategy, by the way. You know what it says? It says that we will modernize what we actually have here. Well, we will build what we don't have, and we will try to control the tech ourselves. Now, this does not mean that India is abandoning Russia. It is making an important decision. There is very different opinion here. India continues to have energy and defense relationship with Moscow. But at the very same time, New Delhi is deepening technological cooperation with countries such as the US and France. And that balancing act, it is becoming increasingly sophisticated for India specifically. India wants Russian energy, it wants Western tech, it wants domestic defense manufacturing, and it wants strategic autonomy. And that is a difficult combination, but perhaps it is precisely what India is trying to achieve. The Su-57 decision can therefore be seen as part of a much bigger strategic shift. India is saying not simply which fighter is better, it is saying which ecosystem gives us the greatest freedom 20 years from now. And that is a very different question. For the US, this matters too, by the way. India reducing dependency on Russian defense tech, it can potentially reduce friction around Western sanction framework and create more space for high-tech cooperation between Washington and New Delhi. It can also strengthen initiatives involving critical and emerging technologies, by the way. So, India's decision, it is not only about fighter jets this time, it is about supply chain. Well, it is about tech, it is about sanction, it is about strategic autonomy, and the future architecture of India's relationship with both Russia and West. So, in other words, India is not simply choosing an aircraft, it is choosing how much control it wants over its own military future. And that brings us to the end of today's Skyline. Ladies and gentlemen, 8 stories, one world, and if there is only one thing that connects all of these stories, it is the geopolitics that is no longer something that happens only inside government buildings. It reaches fuel station, it reaches the shipping lane, it reaches the salary of seafarers, reaches the apartment of an NRI living in Dubai, and it reaches the American tech as well. Well, I'm Triti Yatri, this was Skyline, and I'll see you in the next episode.